There's a lot we could and should say about that gospel passage, but because it seems to me that today's second reading has such an upbeat and uplifting theme to it, we might take a look at that instead to see what it's saying to us. Among other things, St. Paul is confronting in that passage the problem of anxiety. Clearly, anxiety is not a modern-day disorder. They had it back then too, 2,000 years ago at Philippi. Before that, the Romans had it. In fact, the Romans gave us the word for it, angustus, a very descriptive word for the condition because it means literally narrow, confined, constricted. We could accurately say that our lives are narrow, confined, constricted at both ends by a 6-inch birth canal and a 6-foot grave. And in between, we are often narrow, confined, constrained. We are plagued by anxiety. Contemporary psychobabble is at pains to tell us just how confined and narrow our straits are, how constrained we are. We are held down by family bonds. We are biologically defined by our genetic package. We are limited by our social class and our economic status. Our options in life are limited by our education and experience. Our everyday decisions often seem to be determined by necessity or by ignorance. We are creatures of habit, need, compulsion. That can greatly disturb our everyday equilibrium. Beneath it all, we suspect that there's got to be more to life than getting and spending, eating and sleeping, working and playing. And yet we end up so occupied with surviving that we can't quite put our finger on what it is that bothers us inside ourselves. Could it be that we are really simply playthings of stronger, impersonal, unloving forces outside ourselves? And this gets to the heart of the matter, anxiety. And what is St. Paul's prescription for anxiety? He said it at the beginning of that second reading. Have no anxiety at all. Or in another translation says, don't worry about anything. Reminds me of that silly Bobby McFerrin song from a few years ago. Don't worry, be happy. Well, fat lot Paul knew about terrorist plots, ISIS, global climate change, airstrikes in Iraq and Syria, the Ebola virus, Ukraine and Russia, Ferguson, Missouri, poverty and starvation and abuse everywhere, not to mention the Tigers' stupid 2-game losing streak. And yet, nobody in the past 20 centuries or so has suggested a better answer than Paul. So let's try to follow him for a few moments. More than anything else, I think Paul was a realist. He didn't poo-poo anxiety. He didn't say it's just in our heads. He didn't dismiss it out of hand. Instead, he dismissed it onto God. Make your request known to God. And then God will be with you. Make your request to God, and then God will be with you. Some say anxiety is the greatest human suffering there is, and those of us who experience it know that's true. We experience anxiety as a narrowing down of our existence. Our choices are cut off, decisions are out of our hands, we're no longer in charge, we lose the will to do or to change anything. And in fact, there is nothing to do, there is nowhere to go except into a corner where, like rats, we strike out without any effect. We can't even die fighting. We thrash around wildly at that shadowy enemy, but there's nothing there except God. And always, it's precisely at the extremes of experience when we're at the end of our rope, when the chasm is opening beneath our feet, that we run into God, or God runs into us. I'm talking, of course, about the real God, not the God of our imagination or our fears or our needs, but God as God really is. St. Augustine, 17 centuries ago, did have this very experience. He tracked down God to the bitter end of his anxiety, and he left this description: the one who screams out in the abyss overcomes it. The scream itself lifts him above the abyss. Screaming has a purpose. Be careful in front of whom you do it, of course. We mere mortals simply are not sufficient to ourselves, either individually or in bunches. We live and move and have our being only in God. We sometimes call God, whom we can see as controlling everything, providence. We figure that if providence means that God will provide, we should help God through prayer. Obviously, prayer is never a bad idea. But when we get anxious, prayer can easily turn into magic. If I say the right thing the right number of times, I'll get what I want. But if prayer is only a means to provide for our well-being, then it's just another kind of welfare system. Go through the correct procedures, talk to the right people, fill out the paperwork, and you'll get the desired results. So we are still anxious, and so we construct our own system of rewards. We think that if we avoid evil and do good like good little boys and girls, God will owe us something. God will just have to come through. But we know God does not owe us anything by right. God owes us only what God binds himself to. And what God has offered, what God has bound himself to is this: I set before you an open door that no one can close. So providence really is our way out of every imaginable predicament. Its purpose is not to solve problems, but to maintain an open door between us and God. So is it really little more than a nice feeling? Well, maybe, if feelings are merely things. But then anxiety is merely a feeling. And no matter how you cut it, both feelings and anxiety are solidly based in reality. The bear is going to get us in the end. I think that's how we often feel. The bear is going to get us in the end, no matter what. Have we considered, though, how different life would be, how different life could be, if instead of living in constant fear of the bear, we looked him straight in the eye, growled back at him, tamed him down a bit, and even got him to play with us, knowing full well that after he swallows us for dinner, God will swallow us both, and we'll all be safe. Well, if that's a mere feeling, I say it beats the heck out of anxiety.